Buenas tardes, good afternoon, welcome. My name is Victor Ugarte, I'm the director of the Instituto Cervantes in London. Today we are very proud to present ARTES Nigel Glendinning lecture, Problems in Velázquez Portraiture, with Dr. Peter Cherry. Thank you, Peter. Gracias por estar aquí. This event is organized in collaboration with ARTES, Iberian and Latin American Visual Culture Group. So thanks you, ARTES, and thank you especially to Janse Brook, curator of Continental European Fine Arts and the Walker Art Gallery. She will be introducing today our speaker. And thanks to all of you to be here, especially some VIP guests from the National Gallery and Wallace Collection, both directors. So we are so humble to receive in this small venue. So as I was saying, well, of course, we are talking about Velázquez today, along with Picasso, Dalí, and Goya. Velázquez is among the most internationally renowned Spanish painters. The figures in Velázquez's paintings, the looks have gazes that captivate and seduce us. And today, Peter Cherry will take us closer to these portraits and teach us more about why we love so much this Sevillian painter. Let me just briefly tell you about our programs in this month and the next future. Now we are in the Flamenco London Festival. We are celebrating this day, so I really recommend you to attend. We have Sarabaras, for example, tomorrow and I think on Sunday. And we have also in June, we are celebrating Pride with a cinema program of short movies organized in collaborations with the Barcelona Queer Festival, Mostra Fire, 30 years. And also we have on Tuesday, 17th, we'll be hosting the launch of Southernmost Sonnets, a queer poetry reading by Argentinian poet Diego Velázquez. And as I was introducing both directors of National Gallery and Wallace Collection, we have the 18th of June a conference about the Spanish collections in both museums. So it's sold out, I'm afraid. It was sold out 25 hours after we put it. So next time we can do in any of both places. So thank you very much. And Sante, please, thank you very much. Gracias.
Well, welcome to everyone in the audience at the Instituto Cervantes here in London, and all those watching online. And I know that there are quite a few people watching online. I'm Zantley Brook. I'm the present chair of ARTES, the Iberian and Latin American Visual Culture Group, which organizes the annual Nigel Glendinning Lecture in honor of ARTES' founding honorary president. When I asked Peter Cherry whether he would be interested in giving this year's lecture, he said he would be delighted and indeed honored to do so. Dr. Peter Cherry has had a long-standing and internationally recognized career teaching and publishing on Hispanic art and archives, focusing on painting in Spain during the 17th century, and particularly in the areas of still life and genre painting, and artists working in Seville, including Velázquez and Murillo. Having recently retired from his post as lecturer in the history of art at Trinity College Dublin, he has turned his attention to the portraiture of Velázquez for a book in the Renaissance Live series for Reaktion. I have known Peter since we were both at the Courtauld Institute many years ago. He was working on his PhD and I was working on my MPhil. In 2001, we went on to collaborate on an exhibition about Murillo's genre paintings featuring children. Peter told me that while writing this lecture that you're about to hear, he had found, quotes, far too much material, but that I wasn't to worry because he was going to keep the juicy bits in. So I look forward to hearing Peter Cherry on problems on Velázquez portraiture.
You're very welcome, everyone. I'm extremely grateful to the ARTES committee and to the Instituto Cervantes for this invitation, particularly to the director, Victor Ugarte, to Jorge Garriz, and to his team, Beatriz Gago and Puerto Baker, and for the hospitality here in London. It's an honor to have received the invitation and a surprise, since my ARTES membership is overdue by some years. I meant to rejoin this week, but I was just too busy. I would like to give a personal thanks to the ARTES Secretary, Piers Baker-Bates, and his team, and a special thanks to the chair and my friend of many years, Zhangthi Brook, for putting my name forward for this talk. And indeed, it's a delight to be accompanied here by such a illustrious company and so many of us interested in the history of art in Spain, and to be and to welcome to those online, and to see so many friends and colleagues, and indeed some former students who have now become friends and who will have heard all of this before. The honor and the challenge, indeed, is all the greater in a lecture which bears the name of Nigel Glendinning, whom I much admired as an art historian and as a friend. A very early essay he wrote on the market in Spain in a revista called Diamante in the 1970s was really still very well worth reading, I think. I met Nigel in Madrid, in the Madrid archives in early 1980s. He was looking into Goya's patrons and collectors, as ever, and he helped persuade the Getty Provenance Index to employ me to look for 17th century references to inventories of Spanish picture collections in Madrid. Sorry, to picture collections in Madrid. And indeed, he was one of the referees for my job in Trinity, a post from which I've just retired, as you hear, happily retired, and where he'd been professor of Spanish in his day. And he, along with Rosary Mulcahy, was one of my examiners of the PhD thesis alluded to by Zhangthi, which I wrote under the supervision of Jennifer Fletcher, who couldn't be with us here tonight, but which was submitted a year after I took the job in Dublin. I remember that Nigel had broken his leg. I forget how, but he had. So we celebrated my viva voce in the living room of his house at Bow. He was perhaps overly confident in my merits, since he cracked open the bottle of Spanish wine during, rather than after the defense of the thesis. But I'm glad to say this turned an inquisition into a convivial symposium. Now, why are we here tonight? As Zhangthi said, I'm at the final stage, draft stage of this book on Velázquez as a portrait painter for Reaktion Press. Allegedly, as my former students might have it. Since studies of this aspect of his career are widely dispersed in literature on the artist, I thought a single volume would be useful. And in the course of writing, I came across many unresolved problems with his works, in portraiture at least, in spite of all the scholarly attention which the artist has received, and which in turn have to be addressed in the book. So I thought it might be interesting to offer a selection of these here tonight. Almost all of you will be familiar with these problems in one way or another. They are not new problems, and some people in the room have actually addressed them in their own work. But they do remain problems. There are lots of problems with Velázquez. If you don't like these problems, there are many others. And for a book written in our own times, a book for a readership today, one addresses other aspects of the history of art which are part of our toolkit now. Gender, for instance, is in the book. I'm not going to talk about it here as a problem. I mean, a question rather than a problem. But it's addressed in the book the Queen's portraits, for instance, the Queen of Spain, who, if you read some of the literature on Velázquez, is always in a black and white photo, a tiny one, separated from her husband in the portraits section of the book. So she's there in ways that she hasn't been in the literature of previous years. So don't expect either any easy solutions to these problems. I've been mulling them over and I've addressed them. I've had to. But as those of us in the lecturing game know, problems are a teacher's best friend. Students may not like it, but problems get them thinking in seminar discussions. And of course, the last thing you want is a correct answer, however much it might exasperate them. On the other hand, rightly or wrongly, people assume that you've been commissioned to write this book, so you have to have some kind of expertise in this field. So fence sitting is not really an option either. But that in itself is a meta problem for another occasion. So problems. The first problem, I think there are 4 or 5 of them I'll address, are the lost paintings. I came across this. I was writing chapter 1. Off I went, and I realized that most of the paintings from this period, when Velázquez gets the job as royal painter in 1623, are missing or lost. And we don't know where they are. They may show up, some of them, but we don't. At the moment, they're lost. And this matters because Velázquez is finding his way in court portraiture. It's new to him, and the language is new to him. And we'd like to look at them, like to see them. Only thinking of the royal portraits, where is the first portrait of the king? We know he paints in August 1623. The Meadows Museum picture is not from the life. The original, or the one from life might have looked like that, but that's not it. Where's the head of the Prince of Wales, painted very soon after this one? Where's the equestrian portrait of the king in 1625, which made enormous noise in Madrid when it was exhibited in public, in fact, and applauded almost by everyone, but was substituted by a portrait of the king on horseback by Rubens in 1627, which is also lost. Although copies are very useful because we have a copy of that portrait by Rubens with the king in a later head, a later likeness, which someone with a cut and paste job, which does the trick absolutely fine, has put a younger head of Philip on. It must have looked something like that, the Rubens, but we don't know what the Velázquez looked like. Where is the expulsion of the Moors painting, which we have a very, very detailed description of in a number of sources, in fact, inventories and Antonio Palomino, the biographer of Velázquez in the early 18th century. This was painted in 1627. We know it was painted. It hung in the new room, and we know it was destroyed. Well, we think it was destroyed in the 1730 fire of the Alcázar, but we have the descriptions. This head was donated to the Prado quite recently by Bill Jordan, and it's been written up by the museum as a modello for this painting of the expulsion of the Moors. I'm not sure about that, but there have been kinds of reconstructions of what this painting might have looked like from these descriptions and from this existing so-called modello. And I'm not sure that artificial intelligence has the future that we're told it has by the techno bods. They're the lost paintings, and the list is quite extensive, actually. If you look at private portraits, there are many of those lost from the 20s as well. As I say, they may come up. There are some contenders out there. What about not so much lost paintings as lost to the history of art? There's this virtually unrecognized activity of Velázquez as a painter of miniatures. There's a great deal of documentation on this. Velázquez is documented as painting miniatures almost from the beginning of his career in Madrid, certainly in Madrid, if not in Seville, we don't know that. But where are they? One painting that's almost unanimously being considered to be by Velázquez is the Olivares on your left, which is on a naipe, a playing card, which is in the Patrimonio Nacional. I was looking at it the other day in the new Colecciones Reales. I did look at it with Carmen Frias some time ago, and it looks okay. It looks, to me anyway, it looks all right. This one came up some years ago via some colleagues, and it too could be a candidate. It gets more interesting because that's on a copper. These are these latish Olivares. There are others. John Elliott's just been given to the Seville Museum, etc., and there are others around. This one was interesting because it's signed on the back, and it looks very, very like his signature. It's got an inventory number, and it's also got a fingerprint on the right-hand side. So we need to get onto the art history police to get that looked at. But so there's a future there to be you may or may not agree with the attribution. It looks like it's got a lot going for it, I think, but what do I know? One was there are other contenders, and they are out there. It's just art historians seem to be reluctant to stick their heads above the parapet and say this one is. I'm more reckless, perhaps, and would have done so. These two look very good to me in Vienna, and there's no reason looking at them anyway. And the documentation, they're not documented as such, but we know they were being sent, these things. The prince, the young prince, and his sister, why they shouldn't be by Velázquez. There was one, I have to say, hiding in plain sight, in that this picture was given to the Prado by an amateur or collector. Collectors obviously have a vested interest in their pictures, but they do know what they've got often. He was absolutely clear on this. This was by Velázquez of the young Queen Mariana de Austria. Arturo Pereira y Prats. He donated to the museum, and the museum is not confident about its attribution and has demoted it to anonymous. I don't know what you think, but I'm on record. I saw it in an exhibition of small format in the Prado by Manuela Mena, and I thought, God, what's that? I'd never seen it before. So there you are. They're out there. Another problem, that's problem one or two, but another problem I came across was dating. Velázquez was on a salary, so there are no itemized bills for portrait jobs he was doing. Other kinds of sources are there, but they're not always helpful and sometimes contradictory. There's often a discrepancy between the documentation and surviving paintings. We know, for instance, that portraits of the king and queen were sent to Vienna from Madrid in 1632 and 39. We know this from very reliable sources, from customs records. So they actually went, because they left Spain and went to Austria, to the Habsburg cousins. And then there are these two paintings in the Vienna Museum, which are by Velázquez. Certainly the Queen's head is, the rest, the king isn't, but that's another problem we'll come to. These paintings are there. Are they 1632 or 1639? Who cares? Well, I do. I'd like to know, but it's a problem. When did Velázquez repaint these two pictures? The one of the king is painted over an earlier version of the king. The one of the queen is painted over an earlier version of the queen. And everyone agrees that the painting of the king is probably painted in 1628. There are reasons for that I go into in the book. I think that's right. Why is the queen not 1628 as well? The books and some scholars are now saying because the head of the portrait, the full-length portrait, is the same as the head of the portrait of her on a horse. And we know that it's 1634 for the Salon de Reinos of the Buen Retiro. Why isn't the two heads are the same? One follows the other. Why were they not painted at the same time? So that has to be 1634. I don't know. I think it's a repetition, and I think this one is 1628. These are the things that sort of keep you up at night, but I do reiterate that they're very important. It seems to me that the one on the horse does follow the one on the left, so that the prime version of the head is the one on the left. Why she was repeated and not had a life sitting? There was Velázquez had a lot on at the time. He paints the king and the prince from a completely original. Complete originals. The prince is done from an oil sketch in Bergamo, but the queen and the king's parents are done. One is his copy, another one, and there's some collaboration. So it may just be a banal question of that kind, but these questions raise other problems. If it is the fact that she was repainted, or not the fact, there is a possibility she was painted because she didn't want to sit to Velázquez, that's an issue too that could be teased out, and is teased out in the book. The dress is certainly consistent with the 1620s, not the 1630s, so that doesn't fit. Dress history comes up quite a lot because it's telling us, it's raising a lot of interesting questions at the moment. And importantly, I think, if we treat this painting of the Queen as 1628 like the King, you do get the first glimpse of Velázquez's style, the style of the 20s, this bold handling, which is already there in the 20s. The book's cut off pre-Italy, post-Italy, it all changes. Not quite sure about that because there's a lot going on in Velázquez's handling already. And the Queen is a very good opportunity to see that. She was briefly in London for sale, wasn't she, at the end of 23, when we could see this with our own eyes, because it hasn't been much exhibited. The third problem, I think, they're in no particular order, is who's who. Identifications of sitters are extremely difficult to know, particularly with those sitters beyond the immediate royal, well, beyond the royal family. This is not a problem with Velázquez. This is endemic to portraiture. Portraiture anywhere, really. Portrait of a man or portrait of a woman in the Rijksmuseum, we all know, we've all had that experience. There are no clues often in the picture, on the picture itself. They've been taken off sometimes. If there was anything on the frame, it's gone. So they've been severed from these family connections. Heraldry sometimes has been taken off. So we just don't know. A lot of that's been lost. So these are people that we just don't know who they are. Some proposals have been made for them. The best contender for this one in the Wellington Museum is from a long time ago, actually. This is José Nieto, the apostador of the Queen, so Velázquez's counterpart in the Queen's household in the 50s. This man is that man. I really don't know how you can tell. He's very good on small portraits, but and the kind of recall, the reconstruction of some very few clues. But I don't know. I don't know who that is. This has come up. It is Velázquez, I think, but it's got a new. It's got a collar by someone else. That's been proposed as that's been cleaned, and conservation often tells us very much, as we'll see. That's been said to be Juan de Fonseca. But I mean, do you know any court chaplain who's going to be that blingy with a gold chain? I can't be Fonseca. So these are out there, these problems. Then having said that, there have been some real breakthroughs, particularly in the group of portraits around the Roman trip and the second Roman trip. The Pope's barber, we now know who he is. We know that this supposed self-portrait on the left, that was called the Pope's barber because of this list of sitters that Palomino gives. That so-called self-portrait is Juan de Córdoba, the agent of the king in Rome, and a very, very good friend. Velázquez kind of shows his friendship with these portraits. The sister-in-law of the Pope, that came up recently. This part, the gloved hand, etc., repainted. And then when this painting on the left or the lower left was cleaned in the Metropolitan Museum, it was clearly a Velázquez and the same man who's in Breda. We don't know who he is. What do I say in the book? I think it's a self-portrait, but it's wishful thinking, of course. He stands right over the signature or the non-signature, so why not? But there you are. What can you do with these things? Can you develop an identification and then be proved wrong when something comes up in an inventory? Yes, but I've been reluctant to do that, except in this one case. Then there are the problems of the court entertainers, these hombres de placer. This is the term I use in the book. These are these professionals at the court and this professional class at the court. Their stage names will do when we know them, and I do use the stage names in the book. They inhabit these names. We often don't even know the so-called real name. They become this role, and even those stage names have come into question of late. These were both. This used to be Sebastián de Morra. Now it was the Primo for a long time. And now it's gone back to, it's supposed to be Diego de Acedo. This was supposed to be Diego de Acedo, but we know Diego de Acedo was called El Primo. They're clearly not the same people. So it's really quite difficult to know. This is Cruz Valdovinas rompiendo una lanza por Don Diego de Acedo because of inventory references. We just haven't got the time or the headspace for it, but it's well worth reading. All I can say is that this painting was sent in the same roll from the same canvas that the Fraga Philip IV and the Frick collection was painted on. This was shown some years ago. And when this was created and sent in 1644 to Madrid, why it was sent and to whom it was sent, and what kind of joke that was, it was called El Primo. So that's El Primo. What of the problem of addressing this category of liminal sitter for the readership today? Well, the historical terminology just won't do. It has to be placed in inverted commas. Dwarf, inverted commas, enano, palace vermin, sabandijas de palacio, in inverted commas, loco, niño, bobo. You can't use this pejorative language, offensive terms anymore, but you have to be honest to your sources in some ways. So the Prado has gone for buffon, or court fool, or jester, with the condition of achondroplasia, and they have eliminated all references to dwarfism. It's in the Spanish Constitution, Article 49. You can't talk about. You have to talk about persona con discapacidad, or disability not disminuido, or minus válido. So your readership, of course, expects you to discuss these images in these ways. Then there are, in the case of the few portraits of women painted by Velázquez. Do you mind if I take my jacket off? It's thank you. It's pure Irish wool. It's not really the night for that. I didn't expect this in London, but none of us did. In the case of female sitters, and there are few enough of them in Velázquez's work, the incidence of anonymity is really very high indeed, which is another interesting question. This one in Mayer, this unfinished portrait of a woman, I think is Velázquez. This one in the Detroit Museum with this probably overpainted. Hopefully there will be some work on this to look at that. They're well worth looking into. We don't know who they are. And then this woman who's been in the literature for a long time. This is a woman of evident importance, wearing this jewel flower in her hair, this red hair. The name of Juana Pacheco, the wife, is written on the back on the stretcher in the 19th century. It used to be thought, it's long been thought, a portrait of the Condesa de Olivares, although there is no objective evidence for that at all. And that raises another question, a bit like the Queen. Did Velázquez, in this case, ever paint the Condesa? Is it reasonable to expect that Velázquez did paint the Condesa? And if he did, where is it? And is this it? And if not, if he didn't do it, why not? Is it a rejection of such protagonism to be portrayed by the royal painter on her part? And is that significant as well? So these questions are floating around, and it just has to remain portrait of a woman. It's in the literature, quite recent literature, as a portrait of the Condesa de Monterrey, who's the sister of Olivares. And we know Velázquez portrays her before she has a stroke in 1637, so he portrays her in the 20s on the orders of her brother, because she tells us this in a letter. But she looked like that, so it's not. No, I mean, that kind of formal portrait makes you think what that is, but it has all the formal conventions, the hand on the chair, etc. But this needs to be looked at as well, because it looks like a very fine picture. Which brings us to the most interesting of all, perhaps, and that's the lady with the fan, so-called. This surely is not just a lady with the fan, not just a lady with a fan. This is surely Marie de Rohan, the Duchess of Chevreuse, as has been argued for many years. I think possibly first by Enriqueta and has been taken up by others since. She arrived as a French exile in Madrid in 1637, December, and stayed until February 38. And we're told in a letter to a Jesuit, you know this is in all the literature, it's not me. Diego Velázquez is portraying her con el aire y traje francés, probably on the orders of the king, who would lend out his painter to important visitors to the court, as he did on this occasion. Costume and fashion would appear to be key identifiers here, and this is where the recent work on costume history has been very useful. The bodice with the low-cut décolletage, the jubon con escote, was associated with French fashion. It looks like she may be going out in a walnut brown noguerado dress, farthingale, gloves, that fan, the rosary, in an elegant blue ribbon, a lover's knot, according to some, and whatever this is at the end he's holding. Problems in Velázquez, because he doesn't paint in a great deal of detail, abound in the objects in which he includes as attributes. Some people have it as a watch case, but I don't know. The rosary is interesting. If you want to see how mesmerizing a rosary play can be, look no further than Lady Van Dyck. That's what you can do with a rosary if you want. But that joke didn't go down very well. Costume historians have noted that this French bodice is mixed with the farthingale. This is the Guardia Infante, and certainly as regards the date, if it is supposed to be Chevreuse in 1637 or early 38, costume historians tell us this farthingale is later. They also say that both items, both the décolletage and the farthingale, were prohibited by royal decrees in 39, which gives us a terminus ante quem for the picture. But the Guardia Infante went from strength to strength. They were all wearing them. Another more serious prohibition in 1644, when the theatres were closed, gives us a later date, perhaps, for the picture, if that's indeed what's going on. The Guardia Infante is in fact foreshortened. She's turned, it's not the usual, the formal portrait with the Guardia Infante, the full width of the skirt is on show. She's turned, and Velázquez creates, as ever, in this sort of shortening, this turning of the body, this creation of movement and engagement. The turning of the body and the head is key in this engagement, as is the movement of the hands and this idea of veiling or unveiling and the return of the gaze. It's a remarkable thing. Unusual in formal portraiture, I have to say. A bigger problem is that, well, the portraits that I've been able to see anyway of Chevreuse don't really look like her. The key, you may know this, if you do, tell me now, did Chevreuse have blue eyes? No, we need to look at that. The plot thickens because there's this other version of the same woman, which has been pointed out as having been traced from one to the other. So this is second, that's first. And she's in a different costume, the costume perhaps of an honest woman, according to the mores, sartorial mores of the day, and whose hands adopt different gestures, although there's still this play on veiling or unveiling and the received gaze. And there is the added potential meaning of the left hand with the white handkerchief placed over the pubis. Were they intended to be paired? What's the relationship Who is she? It's quite a mystery. And an associated problem is, as has been noted by almost everyone, that this woman looks to be, it's not a portrait as such, looks to be the same woman as this one. So the hairline is key, as is the shape of the eyes. The distinctive hairline, as I say, and even the brown dress and the light fall is quite significant, isn't it? It's not a conventional portrait. What is this? It's not really a portrait of a highborn woman. Certainly, it's not even a portrait. What kind of picture is it? What category does it inhabit in Madrid, in Spain of the time? Some of you who work in other countries in the 17th century might be familiar with this kind of picture. It's certainly not common there. It's in Velázquez's post-mortem inventory. Una cabeza de una mujer haciendo labor, or sewing, perhaps suggests it had some significance for him. It's in the inventory of the apartments he had in the Casa del Tesoro, so the official kind of flat that the family lived in, he and his wife lived in. Are we back to a kind of intimate circle, as has been proposed many times? Is it, if it's not his wife, is it the daughter, Francisca? Again, a question I can't answer easily, although I think we can talk about the painting on the left and perhaps tease it out more on another occasion. A recent argument or a recent address of the picture will have none of this. The Walsh picture collection picture is not a portrait at all, but belongs to the belladonna category of image, with a real woman posing as such. And he adduces these kinds of images that Philip IV was quite keen on collecting, actually. There are quite a few of these pictures, these so-called Tintoretto paintings of these Venetian so-called courtesans. Could there be something in this? Could our friend be in this category? If we're looking for categories of picture, where do they fit? As a sign of, could there be a more carnal kind of side to it than perhaps we haven't spotted? It might be significant the person who published the article didn't work within kind of the close-knit community of Velázquez scholars, came from outside it. And, that may have seen something we haven't been able or allowed ourselves to see until now. As a sign of this kind of carnal side, as a sign of their profession, sex workers were allowed to wear these escotes, according to these royal prohibitions. Could she be a woman from this liminal world? Could she be one of these Margaret Lemon types, a beloved, the beloved of Van Dyck and of many others? Who would sit, if it is this kind of woman, why would she sit for those other pictures, and particularly the one sewing? I don't know. Is this possible in Velázquez's world? Is this kind of image, this kind of category, if you like, possible? Is this possible in an art history of Velázquez? Yes, it's all very confusing, I have to agree, and it's a good example of the range of evidence and hypotheses available, some of them conflicting, and the predicament of the writer or the teacher. Do you lay out all the possibilities and leave the questions open, or do you guide your readers or your students into some kind of conclusion? And who are you to do so? What do I think, as the students often said to me? What do you think? And I can't remember what I said. But as for what I think about all this, you'll have to wait for the book. I did notice in this painting that in the Buen Retiro, there's a lot going on here with these women, with the Scottes playing guitars, and they're certainly not high class women. The fourth problem is the problem around condition and seeing portraits by Velázquez in terms of the material condition, the aging process. There are many aspects to this, and I will just bring up one, the problem of the pentimenti. The pentimenti come through after time. They surface after time, and they compromise the aesthetic intentions of the artist. This is the Philip IV that we saw earlier, painted over this Philip IV. And there's the X-ray showing that. But you see in the current iteration, the Jake the Peg effect of 3 legs, and the cloak, and the change table. And that affects what you're seeing. It has to. And sticking with legs, sticking with legs, there's where copies are very useful, because at least they show you the artist's intention. This was painted, this is a copy of that. Very useful indeed. Never scorn copies. They're absolutely essential. As for legs, well, what about the horses? The horse's legs, as he tries to get the horse's legs right, the horse has 5 different legs. This is due to the transparency of the paint over time, which originally hid them. Right? The back legs look to us, post-Edward Muybridge, like after images, and they allow us to read it as a movement. In fact, I was looking on the internet about horses, and horses apparently, when they raise these, they're raised into this Corvette attitude. pose, they do move their back legs around a lot. And some scholars have argued this is Velázquez taking up the challenge of movement, as he does in different ways throughout his career, the most famous being the hilanderas. But I'm not sure about that. Brush wipings is another problem because they come through after time, particularly in worn paintings. When the background's been worn, you see them very clearly in the painting of the Kimball, or indeed a painting which is either been over-cleaned, with due respect, and you see all the pentimenti as well, or, well, I think it was probably over-cleaned, and that should not be seen. These are now like, however, an individual graphology of the artist. They've been used as evidence of attributions, and therefore valued, in fact, and they've been built into the way we see Velázquez. They were never intended to be seen, I would argue, but they now are, and this was one of the reasons why this Rufina, it's not a portrait, I agree, was seen as a Velázquez when it was being bought by Seville a long time ago, because it had these brush wipings. You see this a lot. It's got brush wipings. Has to be Velázquez. Other issues which are more pressing are, for instance, the equestrian portrait for the Hall of Realms. The Prado was refurbishing the room which still exists and rehanging the whole thing, the battle paintings, the Zurbrand paintings, and the royal portraits in the room. And museums come up with they raise all sorts of questions when they undertake the conservation of their paintings, or indeed are faced with challenges like this one. They're trying to rehang it as it was in 1635. Whether that's possible or not, or what kind of approximation it will be, is another question, but we won't go into that. There are lots of questions around these paintings for the Hall of Realms, the iconography, the meaning of the paintings, their visual and textual sources, endless visual and textual sources. It's a really boring subgenre of the history of art, I have to say. Am I online? Oh, I'm sorry I said that. And the different hands involved in their creation. He had a lot of help with these paintings, the royal portraits and the horses, and etc. What the Prado has seen, which was known about but not really studied very closely, is when Velázquez extends this picture, these two extensions to the field. He likes a broader field. In many cases, he will rethink the picture and broaden the field by adding pieces. And when these are added by Velázquez, it was noticed that in the corner, there was a corner piece cut out. You see here in the X-ray, a corner piece cut out, put onto a stretcher, and could be moved. So it was on a separate stretcher and separate frame, it looks like, from the bigger field. And this has been suggested that this radical intervention, A, is by Velázquez, and B, is to accommodate doors in both end walls, short end walls of the room that were there, and he had to improvise and allowed his pictures to be cut in this way. Not just allow them to be cut, not just a particularly compliant Velázquez and a pragmatic royal servant, but a kind of witty intervention, a kind of Baroque Velázquez, a Baroque trickery. Were these doors really there in 1635? I don't know. I think I fudged it in the book. I'm not sure I go into it in very much detail. It's a shortish book, but I think it needs to be looked at. And I think the museum needs to perhaps consult more than they could now consult more with the building contractors or conservators, because it's necessary to look at the archaeology of the room to see really what was going on there. You make up your own minds. We're all entitled to review the evidence, of course. And then finally, of our problems, and I forget which number it is. You count it. Good God, is it? Well, this is one of the hottest of hot potatoes in the field, the Velázquez catalogue and the problems of attributions. There is a core corpus of undisputed works by Velázquez which form the canon. They're just there. Everyone agrees that they're by him. At the same time, the catalogue has shrunk in the last 100 years radically. Many works have fallen by the wayside due to the different filters of knowledge and of expectations about the artist in operation at different historical moments. It was quite normal in the 19th century that Velázquez should have drawn. He drew everything, and lots of these attributions. He was an assiduous draftsman. Very few, I think, only one drawing is accepted by me anyway. And doubtless the catalogue will be different in the future. We may think we've got it right with all of the means that we have, but doubtless it will change. We could spend the evening looking at arguments for and against the Velázquez paintings in the past. It's always worth reading the older literature, always worth reading the older literature, because these judgments can help shape our own. But we can't, because we haven't got time. But there's a problem in the methodology of attributions too. So I don't know if these are paintings by Velázquez or not, but these are some of the questioned pictures out there. There's also a problem with the methodology of art history that addresses this problem. because since seeking Velázquez's unique hand in every case might go against the realities of a workshop production of portraits. Can we really see, can you honestly tell me, hand on heart, the difference between these two pictures by Philip IV in 1620s? Do you really see which one is the original, so-called original, and which one is the copy, the prime version, the second version? Did it matter? In many cases, it didn't. Certainly, authority was seen as authorship, rather, was allied to authority. The authority that Velázquez had as the king's painter, his office of king's painter, and the fact that he painted the king from life and was the only one allowed to do it. That gave anything that was an original from life and any version of it an authority, which made prototypes, replicas, copies, all Velázquez. So we may be barking up the wrong tree in seeking that hand as much as we like. However, having said that, after the 1620s, perhaps a little before, he is very conscious and settles into the idea of the unique hand. There's no doubt in my mind he does that, and the unique hand in his portraiture. And therefore, it does matter, in fact, I think, that these attribution questions have to be looked at. So the problem can be addressed in from three interrelated angles. One is around the expansion of the catalogue with new attributions. Another is the question of the disputed attributions of the works already in the catalogue. And a third, related to these, is the reattributions of works in the catalogue. And I suppose that an appropriate solution to all of these questions would be to find scholarly consensus. You've heard of the phrase herding cats. Well, I think consensus in quite a few cases is very far off. There are these new Velázquez, let's call them that, come up in the public and private collections. We've seen some already. And the market has a particular interest in these. And that's absolutely right and proper. Dealers and auction houses, of course, want to place important works of art with museums and collectors at a fair price. As regards those in private hands, there are many. I remember quite a few of them, but this one I remember vividly, this Simón de Rojas, the venerable Simón de Rojas. We know that Velázquez paints the deceased Simón de Rojas in 1624. We know it. And we know that other artists paint him too. So is this painting in the Duke of Infantil's collection by Velázquez? Many think so. Many think so. But I'm not so sure. It doesn't look like the Sor Jerónima de la Fuente, for instance. So I don't know. This is one that needs to be looked at. And with all due respect, the family might allow people to look at it objectively. So that's there. This one also came up, published by a very close friend of mine. Looked brilliant in the X-ray. When I saw the X-ray, wow, I thought this is a lot going for it. This looks right. The technical data was right for a painting by Velázquez of the 1620s. Has a lot of consistency with what we know. That's a Soledad upside down. He flipped the canvas when I painted it. And then, you know, when you saw the picture, you saw it in Paris in 2015. I saw it again a few years ago with the family. Yes, it has quite a thick varnish on it, but it just didn't look right. This doesn't sound very scholarly. It didn't look right. That's what you say when you're in front of the picture. All the family's waiting for you to say something. It doesn't look right. Say, no, wonderful. I need to go and study it and look at that. Then they never, of course, they never called back. So I got off the hook. And then there was our friend here that I had something to do with in many years ago, and came out of nowhere. Literally came out of nowhere. And it seemed I had to write it up in a commercial capacity. I mean, not in the Burlington magazine. I had to put it into another venue because it had to be published quickly. Made quite a noise. Sold for a lot of money. And what do I think now? Yes, it's cleaned up quite well. And there he is. I don't know who he is. So that I did have a bit of involvement with it. A brief moment in the sun. 15 minutes of fame in 2010. My university was delighted. They said, "Can we get any money from the family?" So I said, "Oh God." So I wrote to the family. I said, "I might get something out of them. I hope none of them are here, but I don't know." And I said, "Could you?" A very nice formal letter, and the provost supported me. And I said, "For a scholarship to visit Spain," and they said no. 3 million quid. Anyway, never mind. I'm not bitter. And then conservation. Conservation is vital. Conservation can change the whole field. And it's really important in attribution questions. When this came up, I thought it was very good, I have to say, but I wasn't sure. Cleaned by the Met and was published recently, and it looks absolutely right. I think so. Yes. So that's one. And then the National Gallery, Philip IV. This was a painting. This is a painting related to this one in the Prado. Painted no Golden Fleece, which this follows this painting by very few years, in fact, which seemed to go against everyone's knowledge of his saying, I don't want to be portrayed because I don't want to see myself old. I kind of do it once. He doesn't say that, I'm making it up. He's do it once, but I'm not going to do it again. So this one was always seen to be a version of the first one that looks nothing like it by another hand. And it's a lot of people believe in the National Gallery painting, and it's not these copies, of which there are more copies of this painting than that, because this one was obviously seen as having an enormous authority in some ways, and both were made into prints after all, and that's how we know the dates, more or less. Sorry, before 75, I don't mean that, I mean they're 57. That seems to go against everything. See, I caught you out there. You're not looking or listening. You've probably fallen asleep by now, which is fine. I put that in deliberately. Those former students, I expected you to. But Dr. Cherry, surely that's not as late as. So. No, I'm in favour of it. So this has been a problem, and sometimes art history gets in the way of seeing, because we have this letter saying the king doesn't want to be portrayed old. Forget it, look at the picture, and when you see the picture having been cleaned, and I saw it this afternoon again, this should silence all detractors. It's an interesting one because it's the last one he does of the king, and the king doesn't allow himself to be painted after Velázquez. He kind of honours Velázquez's role at that, and this is the last one, but not painted from life anyway. As regards disputed attributions, I'll stick to those in private collections on the advice of my lawyers. But this is a real interesting case. The Adrián Pulido Pareja, who's this this naval general officer, who wears this golden fleece. This Santiago, Knight of Santiago Venera, which he receives in 1647. So the date of 39, which is sometimes given, can't be right. Acquired by the National Gallery in 1890, its most expensive Velázquez, very much admired at the time, very much admired, and admired by artists, highly admired by artists. But was attributed to his son-in-law and seemingly his assistant, Martínez del Mazo, only 20 years later after its purchase, and has ever since oscillated in the literature between these hands. The catalogue of the National Gallery of 1970, McLaren and Braham, has it as ascribed to Juan Bautista Martínez del Mazo. It didn't make the cut in the big Velázquez show at the National Gallery in 2006. And the gallery website and label currently has it as possibly by Mazo. Possibly by Mazo. Surely this one has to be by Velázquez. For a start, it's signed in bad Latin, and it's dated 1639, which it can't be. But this is fascinating, isn't it, the way evidence can stack up but then contradict everything else. It's one of the methodological problems that kind of overarches the whole talk. But this very uniqueness of a signature plays against its authority. Velázquez never signs his pictures, and when he does, he doesn't sign them for some non-entity like this man. He signs them for the Pope or the King, puts his signature, or a cardinal. So that's odd. And it's in this faulty Latin, and it must be apocryphal. But evidently, someone really wanted us to think it was by Velázquez. Secondly, it's given a lot of attention by the biographer Antonio Palomino in the Parnaso Español Pintoresco Laureado of 1725. He says it's one of his most celebrated portraits, and he transcribes and corrects the signature. And he says it's the one that Philip IV saw and thought it was the real person, and said, "Are you still here? Why haven't you left the room?" And then he sees it's a painting. And says other things about it. So it's written up. It gets quite a lot of press in the Cal Palomino, etc. And then it's also in the Duke of Arcos's collection. It's in this very important collection of a man who owns 12 Velázquez, including the woman sewing in Washington. And he had two of them, not just one of them, two of them, two Pulido Parejas. This one in the gallery, and this one, the Duke of Bedford's collection at Woburn Abbey. You wonder whether Palomino, Arcos, and all were not in cahoots. But there's the historical evidence. It's very, very strong historical evidence, conventional historical evidence. So the picture has a lot going for it. So why is there continued reservations about it on the part of the gallery? And I quote, "If you compare Don Adrian's silk sleeve with a similar detail in Velázquez, Philip IV of Spain, in brown and silver, which we did this afternoon with a painter friend of mine, a classical portrait painter friend of mine, you can see how much more masterful the latter's application of paint is, Velázquez in other words. How does the style, the handling, the technique of the painting hold up in terms of our own state of knowledge and expectations around the artist? Well, it does look very unlike that sleeve of the National Gallery, I have to admit. It just doesn't look like it. This is from 1631, 22, and ours would be from later. But certainly Velázquez's focus on the head, where the costume is more slightly out of focus, is typical of him. That wouldn't be a problem. But this is quite oily paint on the left there, with broad, squiggly brushstrokes applied with pressure, wet in wet. It seems to all be going on at the same time. You can actually rehearse it with your hand. It's always useful to do that when you're looking at paintings. A lot seems to have gone on at the same time, whereas Velázquez tends to use underpainted layers, let them dry, over which he drags and scumbles paint. And these strong black touches are important in his work too. And the other standard comparison is the Fraga portrait and the Pulido Pareja. So I share that with you. Having said that, the head is very good. The head is extremely good. The underpainted shadows in the eye sockets, as my painter friend suggests, the difficulties of painting the eye in shadow, it's lost in shadow like that, with no lines, is remarkable. This interplay of thin and thick painting, although this is quite thickly painted compared to his earlier work, is all very, and those rich flesh tints, a bit like the Roman period paintings, that's all very, very convincing indeed. So can we come to any conclusion? Is it Velázquez or is it Matho? Comparisons help. We're lucky to have the Dulwich Picture Gallery copy by Matho of the Fraga portrait. That's well, you know which is which. I'll point that out. It's a slide test that you'd all pass. But you can see that it's more economical, simplified in the case of the copyist. So I'm not sure that tells us much, but there it is. What about the late Philip IV? This has literally been keeping me awake for weeks. And can't say I've got very far with it. The kind of dabbing of the paint here you might find equivalence there. Well, that was slightly better than that to me, but I don't know. It's a difficult one. That might be, if it's not exactly, you can't find like for like. You can certainly think of a kind of approach to the way the paint is put on, which might be consistent with the other. What about this? Recently, it was proposed, I don't quite know why, by someone who proposed this as the painting of the National Gallery as Velázquez, with this comparison, the comparison of the sword hilt of this person, which is now considered to be by Carreño. It's never been, it used to be called Velázquez. This sword hilt is quite like Pulido Pareja's sword hilt. I actually have to agree. So that takes us absolutely nowhere. So can we give so much weight to traditional connoisseurship? Can we do that? What is the judgment of the experienced eye useful anymore, or does it risk flying in the face of all this historical evidence? Does science help us, and can the objectivity of the scientific analysis help us? It hasn't had a lot done with it, but the X-rays are quite interesting because the way the paint has been applied on a white ground with the palette knife, etc., is very like him. The shadows, if you saw the shadows, are very like Velázquez. The ground is this light ground, optically light ground. The pentimenti we looked at this afternoon, it's a lot going for it. No baseline of the separating floor from ceiling, a lot going for it. Two hands have been adduced in the past. People said it's two hands, Velázquez and Matho. I don't know. Maybe the head is Matho, the figure might have been laid in, and the costume finished by someone else. We assume as art historians that all things were done by the single hand. Portraits were, the master did the head, Velázquez did the head. Anyone else could have finished it off, and it did happen. So we might be there. This might be an example of the messy realities of production rather than the neat attributions to a single name, which is so common in art history and so common in art attributions. Then finally, there's the art history being reshaped by the canon of art history of Velázquez portraits reshaped by the repositories in which they reside, by the museums and collections. Of course, Nigel Glendinning had his own axe to grind with Prado's de-attribution of the Colossus by Goya to someone else in 2008. And staying with the Prado Museum, two examples, salient examples come to mind. One is this painting gone into limbo. My label is deliberate. This is now thought to be attributed to Velázquez, the 10th Count of Conde Duque de Benavente. It was omitted by Lopez Rey, omitted by Jonathan Brown. I don't think Enriqueta liked it. There are a number of curious things about it. I know that this is a particular Velázquez demon that someone in the room is grappling with as we speak and doing very important work on it. It has a double ground, a Madrid ground with a white priming over it, but suggesting it was the 1630s, when the sitter was in his 50s, could be right. Why is the conde represented in armour from the Royal Armoury, Philip II's armour? That's a problem. Was the portrait, if it's the 1630s, and we know he got his golden fleece in 1648, where he's got the chain of the golden fleece certainly, it's there in X-ray. There's the golden fleece. There's the chain. It's there. It was there in photography in the 19th century. It's still there, but it's gone now. So where's that gone, and what's going on there? These are questions that no doubt this scholar will answer. And why is it not Velázquez? I remember the students saying that. They just stood up and said, "Why not?" And I thought, absolutely right. That's the attitude. Why not? When we look at the royal collections, and this painting by Pantofolo de Cruz, that's a copy of tissue. Velázquez, of course, and then what do you want? I mean, who else could have painted that? Is not the visual evidence enough to come to a conclusion? And the last one of all is the Infanta Margarita. This, again, was a painting in the gallery in the Prado, and we can end on this. This was considered one of Velázquez's greatest portraits in the 19th century. Omitted from the monographs of Enriqueta, Harris, and Jonathan Brown, and a collaboration between Velázquez and Matho for some, by Matho for Lopez Rey, although it was in the 1990 Velázquez show with its traditional attributions of Velázquez, and given to Matho in 1999. In the wonderful exhibition in the Prado, Velázquez y la familia de Felipe IV in 2013, it was billed as one of the greatest Matho portraits ever painted, the greatest portrait he ever painted. I shouldn't say this, but I have to confess that to some irritation at the picture label saying that it had been definitively given to Matho. If we've learned anything here tonight, it's to stay away from words like that. What about objective reasons for it being one or the other? The age of the sitter, she's born in July 1651. She has to be age 9 in our portrait, and there she is at the death of her father, and she doesn't look like a 9-year-old. I don't know. It's very hard to tell, the size of the body, etc. Costume history was also adduced. This is not a Guardia Infante from the 1650s, but a Guardia Infante from the 1660s. There's the lady with the fan, she's turned. I don't know, then she's even younger, and that's a pretty big Guardia Infante. I'm not sure about that either. And then there is the third evidence that was used, set of evidence that was used. This painting, this is the detail of our painting in Prado, compared to a painting which is accepted as by Matho, which is sent to Vienna, and the key feature being not that it's exactly the same, but the detail of the jewel has changed because she's not wearing a kind of probably a religious jewel with floral decoration, but the double-headed Habsburg eagle. This, according to the authors, has to signify her betrothal to Leopold I in Vienna, to whom indeed she was married. The marriage negotiations were being settled at this time, after Velázquez's death, certainly, and when Matho stepped into the office of royal painter that his father-in-law had left. So it would seem to be absolutely right. This one is right. This has to be Matho. I agree with that. The flawed logic seems to me is that if, and this was in the exhibition, if that is 1663, that's 1663. I don't see any reason to think that the prototype should be the same date as the copy. The prototype may be one date, and the copy could be painted any time after that. I think in one case, the museum perhaps might have taken less account of the technical data. And with all due respect to those in the field of technical research, I'm an amateur, but I know more or less know how to read an X-ray to some extent anyway. And this is, of course, a field of enormous complexity as well. And I don't mean to simplify it here. But at least the one thing the gallery didn't do was talk about the deficiencies of one hand according to the other, relative to the style of the other. The National Gallery perhaps could rethink that, because this is absolute commonplace in attributions. One has to be better than the other. Comparisons are never innocent. They're always judging in favor of the other by means of quality, in terms of however that's defined at different historical periods. So they didn't do that. The Prado talked about differences in the painting and between Velázquez and Matho. I thought that was absolutely correct. I agree that the painting in Vienna by Matho could easily be by Matho, and we need more technical documentation on it. I have to say, however, the faces look different, and they look this face looks very like other paintings of the Infantes by Matho, and rather unlike those by Velázquez, but we can't go into that here. the technical data is quite interesting, quite important, and it's important in terms of this attribution question, because it's been known about for some time. The first X-ray of the head of the Infanta in pink, the one in the Prado, which is this one, was taken in 1953, and actually before the campaign of technical research by the Stockholm Museum in the 1960s, and long before Carmen Garrido's seminal book on Technica, the Técnica y Evolución de Velázquez in 1991. So it's been around a long time. And the picture is technically consistent with other portraits by Velázquez of the 50s, particularly of the royal family. So that X-ray is kind of close to that one, but in one obvious way, well, obvious to someone, a mere amateur myself, that the preparation is the noise of the preparation almost obliterates the very thin layers of paint which form the figure. So it's very hard to see the figure, and there's no kind of strong outline drawing at this date. There is, but it doesn't come through in the X-ray. You see it very clearly in infrared, which would be another question to talk about. But so it's very hard to see the figure in these pictures. It's kind of, where's Wally? Where's Infanta? And she is there, particularly ghostly image there of her, which is that's an X-ray of that. So I thought that was quite an important kind of evidential base, which might have been looked at more closely. And the other question, as we've talked about earlier this afternoon, is we need more on these other painters around. There is a school, not just Matho, but there are other painters who take up the Velázquez style as a kind of mannerism, really. They don't do what Velázquez does. There's no evidence, serious evidence, except for the view of Saragossa, that even the son-in-law took up the optical issues in Velázquez painting. Who got Velázquez books? I presume Matho, but did he read them? I don't know. So these are questions that are out there as well. But it's a kind of mannerism, I think. But having said that, maybe Matho used a prepared canvas by Velázquez and just painted over it, and maybe there's nothing to do with it. The painting was prepared like that. Velázquez never got around to painting it, and in 1663, Matho does a job on it, and that's that. However, it remains a fact, and I think it is a fact, that when you X-ray the Prado painting, X-ray the painting we do know by Matho, the 1665, 66 of the Queen as a widow, they don't look anything like each other. And generally, it seems Matho uses a dark Madrid ground. And it's always astonished me that someone who works with Velázquez, marries into the family, etc., does not take over the technical resources of the father-in-law. Maybe they didn't get on as well as we think, but sticks to what he learned earlier, and doesn't often see the potential of the deep potential of the technique of his father-in-law, as we might expect him to have done. But the definition of that head, the way the paint is applied, the way the forms are modeled, etc., look quite different to me. So are we back to this question again of the two hands? I stick with two hands. I mean, two hands, not just two hands. You paint in all kinds of ways, often with the hands, but two artists. And are we possibly in the world that certainly Carmen Garrido used to think, where Velázquez might have started off? I've looked very closely at that. You need binoculars because I can't get into the lab always, and it's not been in the lab for a long time. But we've looked very closely. It seems to me that is painted by someone else, and you can actually see the joins at times where someone's come along and finished it off. So are we back to that? And is that a fair enough conclusion? I don't know. It's been a delight to share these problems with you. I've hopefully you can sort them out, help me sort them out. Email me if not tonight over at the wine. You can talk them through. What kind of credentials do you have to be talking about such serious matters? Certainly as a retiree, I have been at it a while, for better or for worse. I don't know who that is, but. And that was in Castres. I hadn't been to Castres in France for the Musée Goya for many years, in fact, and to see the Philip IV Hunter pre the reworked Velázquez painting with the hat and all in a condition pre the final version on a light ground, very like Velázquez, and again something that we need to go back and think about. So thank you very much. That's all I had to say.
Will you take questions?
No. No, of course I will, yes. If we have time, yeah.
Any questions? Or overwhelmed?
I can't to start.
Yeah.
My head is spinning. It's very impressive. There's a run through and throwing up all those really complex questions, so difficult to resolve. But with all the work that you've done on Velázquez portraiture, or the literature you've looked at, all the other things that you've accumulated your studies over the years, can you give us a sense of what it was like? Is it possible to? What was it like to be painted by Velázquez?
To be painted by him. It's a really. I read a very good book on Van Dyck as a portrait painter and the kind of social dimension to portraiture by someone who works, an American, Adam Eker. Who said that? Yes, Adam Eker, and it was very good on Van Dyck, and in the sense that, or indeed Rubens, what it was like to sit before them, and sitters sometimes say that. What to give some inkling to that. Did Velázquez talk while he painted? Was he given to talking? How did he treat his sitters? These stories of the familiarity that so-called familiarity has with the royal family are very misleading. These are unequal power relations. There's a very good story of Antonio More, who, when the king Philip II is in the studio, and the king pats him on the back, and Antonio More sort of pokes him with his mahl stick. This is a massive issue at the court. He's almost got rid of the royal painter. So it's not an equal relationship. But I think he learned on the job. I think it's important with the royal sitters. He's there living in the palace, which is an enormous privilege for him. But I cannot honestly, in all respects, tell you what it was like, except that we wrote something for a conference we did on Velázquez, on images of queenship 2 years ago. We published our findings. It was one of the things that was obvious about that we don't often see. There's the sitter standing there. I think the head from the sitter and the costume could be by anyone. There's another story, José Martínez, that says the man who has his portrait of his daughter painted complains to Velázquez that he doesn't include the very expensive Flemish collar, or the collar she's wearing. And of course, Velázquez painted the head from the sitter, but then forgot all about the collar because he did the costume, or whoever did the costume, when the sitter wasn't there. So the life sitting was ahead. And I discuss a lot with a painter friend of mine whether it was a life-size sitting, so the canvas is close to the head of I cannot see that possible, certainly on the Queen's portraits at all. I probably don't see it with the king either. So what kinds of informality or ceremonial informality was involved? His own attitude to the painting these people himself is very hard to know. Even Rubens says when he's in 2070, he says, I painted them all. They were willing to sit for me. I painted them all from life, the whole lot of them, the whole family. And it was wonderful. But there's not really any inkling. But what I was saying was that when we see them standing on their own, it was clear that the room was filled with people. And if you think of another good source for, not perhaps for, but generally, there's a very good book, Lorne Campbell's book on portraiture from the 1990s. It's very good on this, the mechanisms of portrait painting, the stories around portraiture. But Las Meninas is quite a useful source in some way because they're all there. They're all in the studio, the old rooms of the prince, and they're all there. This was a kind of public thing, and people did watch him paint. The king we know watched him paint. They must have talked about painting as he was doing it. Who had a mirror behind them? Was it Reynolds? So the sitter could talk, so could see themselves being done, the magic happening. I don't know. But we've very little evidence to go on. But there were more people around. So when you see them standing there on their own, that's not what it was like at all. And Bernini, as I say, Bernini, when he goes to France, and Bernini's comments on portraiture are very useful, in fact, to think about this. Bernini was a great public figure. It was a courtly act. And everyone was there watching him sculpt the king, watching him draw the king, watch the king, and all wondering what the hell he was up to. So I think there was a mystery, a magic involved, but it was a kind of public act as well. But I've no long way of saying I haven't a clue.
I was really interested by what you said about muscle technique being very different. And I wondered, is it possible that Velázquez didn't actually share much about technique?
Kept the secrets.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, Platov, for example,
Yeah.
famously
Yeah.
lock himself away
Yeah.
and not let people in.
Yeah.
Because you think it's quite perverse not to, when you've got such a great painter as your your master, you know.
Yes, no, it's he wasn't willing to share. I mean, it's not so much sharing. What did he not? I mean, white grounds, Rubens. There's not much secret. You know, the kind of gains are pretty clear. If you don't want to see them, fine. It's up to you. Just don't. But then the way Velázquez paints, you'd imagine he would have watched him, seen it, or talked about it. Maybe he just, well, I don't know. I don't want to say he's not as good as. I really don't. I've just said it, but it's you know, he's a great mimic. Mathers, one of the problems with Mathers, someone's working on Mathers, I'm going to publish a book on him, and now we don't trust mimics. You know, they're just taking someone off. You know, I argued against myself. In fact, when I was thinking about the view of Saragossa. He teaches the Prince Baltasar Carlos is very interested in painting, and of course they all are, aren't they? And practice painting, and Mathers is drawing teacher, as Maino had been to Philip IV. And the view of Saragossa looks like there's a lens used. I mean, to get that view, and there's a convent up on the hill there from which it could be taken. And someone says about the Prince when he dies, someone who writes very eloquently about Velázquez, this chronicler from Ustaroth, who writes about the nonchalance of Velázquez painting. It's a courtly style. And says the Prince who's 16, 17, liked to talk about painting and distances. He liked to think about that. You know, Velázquez is very interested in that. These optical matters of scale, size, focus, the optical field, which is irregular, of course. It's not just the central field, but all the banal, everything around the central field, which he kind of includes in the pictorial image. Those shadows are indicative of that. And the Prince liked this. So Mathers, so maybe there was more to not just the relationship with the Prince, that maybe there's more to Mathers' intellect, let's call it, his interest in painting as an art and theory, a theoretical Mather, than I perhaps give him credit for. It's so ingrained in the historiography and in the literature that there's this great painter Velázquez, and then there's other painter and other painters who are never mentioned. Everything goes under Mather. And you start to put them all together, they don't look anything like each other, the so-called Mathers. And in the case of miniatures, for instance, they're all Mathers apparently, but no one's ever said he ever did one, actually, but they're all saying Velázquez did them. So this is the problem with historiography and with our methodology. And as you write these books or these articles, you know, these things come up, you know, loom up, and you have to address them. You think, oh God, it's only 70,000 words, I'll leave it for another occasion. But of course you have to. And teaching, I miss it a lot, because teaching, when you're in front of students every day, the challenges they throw up, you have to give a coherent and plausible account of whatever you're talking about in class. And the students, the first people to say, hang on, no, you said the other day, you know. So you have to be on your toes, and I miss teaching because you can field a lot of questions with the students, and they're very useful because they engaging with these questions and helping you yourself to think about them. And maybe museums don't do as much of that as maybe the academics do, but it's certainly very valuable, isn't it? Those of us who are in that game. So I don't know if I answered or not, but it's a very good question, what he kept back. In contracts, there was no formal contract ever between the two of them, it's just this marriage. It's now been shown by a document that Velázquez didn't want him to marry, didn't want his daughter to marry him. It's going to be published next week. Not by me, but one that got away. So, you know, who knows? But there may have been something there that this Van Dyck Rubens relationship is not the appropriate one for those two. But I think maybe Mather just wasn't. You know, Velázquez is kind of unusual, and he's a hard person to measure the others against. Yeah. Hello. Yeah.
I know you paint, I just wanted to.
I'm more of the Mather school.
The book on the Pope's face is so, to my mind, so much about him scrutinizing Velázquez. It's very powerful and
yes, yes.
And as someone who does paint,
yes,
it is really hard to be in the room with someone looking at you all the time. I think we don't think about this with portraits, that you're being scrutinized as the painter, and that's a real challenge to painters.
Yes.
In fact, you end up thinking you don't want to do it anymore. Gainsborough thought he didn't want to do it anymore.
Yes.
Get up.
I know, that's a good.
Spot that ferocious look on the Pope's face, don't you think?
No, it's. I think he did learn. That's the courtly. He had enormous confidence in himself. I think that helps. If you, because there's all these stories about when people stand in front of the king, ambassadors, they all kind of start to shake. But that's not going to make for good painting if you're, however familiar you are, you've got to produce these things from the life. And Velázquez seems to not suffer from that. I mean, there's a portrait painter in the room, I think, who might illuminate the relationship between sitter and painter. Is it as the sitter considers be awkward? What?
As daunting as all that.
You might not like the sitters either.
Yeah.
No. You can never bite the hand that feeds you. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question, and maybe novelists can make up a good case, but I seem to have to consider the evidence. It's maybe too much to this, but we just don't have the data. You argue across from other kinds of relationships and painters, and they may not always be appropriate. They help you imagine a bit more what these situations were like. It was very hard to get a sitting, I think. There's a Frank Cruz de Carlos published something when Pantocco de la Cruz had to spend over 2 months at the Escorial trying to get the Queen to sit. I mean, just impossible. Just too busy, couldn't. And there are stories about that as well. And then the famous phlegma was Velázquez doesn't really, this idea that there are painters in Pliny who have phlegma and other painters who have phlegma who he just doesn't has to be really ordered to do things. Otherwise, so he's not jumping around waiting to hankering the people to be portrayed. He's told he waits until he's told what to do. And then he does it, and even then he's not. The patrons are not happy because he takes too long. This may just be patrons who don't know their own role. This is in the literature too. The patrons have to know their role. I mean, sitters have to know their role as well. It's a two-way street. I'm sorry.
Where do you stand on the portraits, bustling portrait of the Pope in Apsley House?
Yes.
Is it an oil sketch study?
Yes.
And he later worked up
Yes.
the big paint portrait.
It's a good one.
Or is it after?
Yes. Something I had to deal with in the book, that the ideas around there was always a life study that was then made into but the case for the Queen, 1651, he comes back from Italy. The Queen was done on a full-length portrait. So you're either on a step, she's raised, stairs, or it's rolled up. You just do the normal sitting. So there's not always a painted sketch for the final work. And I think in the case of the Pope, that's it. And I think the Apsley is a version which is documented. He brought one back. It doesn't say it was after or before, but brought one back. And then the one in Washington seems very odd indeed. There are lots of them out there, and there's in fact a group, Gretchen Hirschauer has formed a group around the problem of the Pope's portrait. So I can send you her email. The group of scholars studying this problem. It's another problem, the versions of too. The Quevedo in the Wellington Museum is an absolutely stunning Velázquez. It hasn't been conserved. And the one that's in all the books is the one in the Valente Don Juan in Madrid, which is what it is. It's not a matter, it's pretty good, it's not. So versions of, which is one, two, that's a big issue. You're right to bring it up.
Well, I think Francis Bacon would have seen that because the Wellington collection was on display at V&A after the war.
Oh, yes.
And so his claims never to see
the big one, the full length, the 6.
He's almost certain saw that one.
Yeah, it seems to be counterintuitive, doesn't it? Because you expect that bust then in a full seated figure.
Well, and Royal Portrait.
Yeah, but it might be the other way around.
Would have a bust portrait.
Yeah,
so the studio could work.
Yes. Yeah.
So he's sort. I suppose Velázquez is very unusual.
No, he does that. Yeah, he does that. Yes, there are a couple of cases of that and other cases as well. It's not kind of just a regular kind of procedure. It doesn't seem to be. And there are the Infantas get quite a few. Infantes, in fact, the Pontes Carlos they get a few old sketches from the life. That one, the late Philip IV in the Prado seems to be from the life. Not even any of the regalia of the Golden Fleece. It's just made into a print. Yeah, it's complicated, that actually. Good to bring it up. Yeah. Marta, but
Yes, another problem,
good.
big problem, that do you think he ever picked up chalk and paper for his portraits? You know, from somebody who was raised, you know, around Pacheco. Did you get anywhere with that?
Yes and no.
Drawings problem?
I tried to not write about Pacheco, and I found it impossible.
So do I.
Yeah. Tried to not write about it, but he tries to get him a job at court, at least an honorary position at court in 25. It goes nowhere. Very close to him, taught him about everything really, about life, about family, about painting. He's good on portraiture. I don't think Velázquez follows those procedures. He develops his own. And the problem of it is a problem, you're right. I know people in the room and yourself know much more than me about this. I see one drawing, which was the one in the academia of the, who is it? Borja, the Carlo Borja. That's definitely, I've looked at that a lot. I had that right here. And that's definitely him. That was probably for a miniature. So it's got a circle around it. From the same chalk.
Yes.
And indeed there is one in the imagery actually, but I don't, I'll tell you why not. I think that, there may be circumstances when it would be useful, but I think it gets in the way. Drawing someone and then painting them. He loved Caravaggio. As I've aged, and I'm missing the trips to Rome with the students, seeing Caravaggio every year. But I think when Velázquez goes to Rome, probably both trips, but certainly number one, he's fascinated. And he's true to one thing all through his life, which is painting and life. A lot of people have talked about this, but it is, he takes that idea, that concept, in directions in portraiture, I think, which is by synonymous with the copy. It weighs in directions that really only he makes a portraiture something, gives it a status perhaps it had in the north. It's very interesting Flemish painting when he's in Seville, and you could see the underdrawing in the Flemish paintings even then, I'm sure. But I think it's this encounter that excites him and hits him. And this is when they try to say it looks like the real person, or it could be. They're trying to find these words that say that what we value in Velázquez, not in that picture. I have to say the ones we value that because it's very, very strong. I think that comes from the direct painting. I think. Yeah, you're painters, both of you. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's good to know. To rewrite that. See. Yes.
So, I've always thought it by Pacheco. It was Pacheco, not Pacheco. If you look at the physiognomy, it's so similar to Velázquez.
Yes.
Comparing it.
The one in the Prado.
Oh, sorry, not Pacheco. My husband.
I don't know who he is.
No. His father. Sorry, his father. My brain's gone. Velázquez's father.
Yeah. Do we have an image of him?
No, but
Oh.
the physiognomy.
Oh yes. I know. Yes. Yes.
And he lived a long time.
You may be right. The police have a facial recognition system. I'm horrified to say they do, and there may be something in this. I find it very hard to tell who's. Even the Pope's barber, Brandani, was recognized because there's another portrait of him. And in the case of Algardi with the different popes, Bernini's pope, when there's another portrait, it's very useful. But the woman with sewing is a portrait and not a portrait. How do we know that's the same woman? Why do we think it's the same? But we can't know. Why do we think it is? And when you look at someone you kind of know it's them, even if their face is foreshortened. You just either because you know them or you love them, and whatever they're doing, you're just fascinated by it. So these are very difficult things to talk about, and it's hard to know sitters, who's who, the facial, identify them, and you find yourself going up these different roads, and sometimes the next day you open the computer and say, I didn't, did I? Must have had too many glasses of wine then. So I don't know. It may be him, may not. We may never know. It's a suggestion. It's a valid one. We have to accept, and I used to say this to students, we have to accept there are things that we will never know. We cannot think that somehow we're going to know it. And that's just life. We work with what's left to us, and that's, you know, and I'm just reluctant. I'm not the kind of art historian who's prone to speculation. I wish I were, but I'm not. So I don't tend to. The problem you've got is the Pope's barber was, God knows how many, even the Pope's barber, they found out who the Pope's barber was. There were 2 or 3 of them. And then it ends up someone else, this humanist, nothing to do with the Pope's barber. So you don't want to be caught out either. So you have to be circumspect.
Was a banker.
What?
Was a banker.
The Cordoba. Yeah, the Brandani, yeah. But he had humanist interests. He was a serious kind of, serious friend of, serious friends of Velázquez, yeah. See,
Peter, wisdom is not purely painting related, but in your presentation, you share 2 renders about the new Salon de Reinos.
see.
And I wanted to ask, what are your thoughts or what's your opinion about recreating what has been built? It's going to be refurbished by Roman Foster to recreate in a space that for 500 years has been used for the purpose I was
Yes.
There was a point to think of bringing some paintings that have been lost. As you say, you will never know how was the paintings were exhibited for that. What are your thoughts on that?
The kind of sequence of paintings, the battle paintings, and the different walls they were on, and the location of the port and those doors, etc. These are issues the Prado is best equipped to deal with, I think. And scholars, it's a desultory kind of art history, which I can't read anymore actually, because it's pretty dull. It's going to look fantastic. I think it's the right thing to do. You've got this building; it's there. It would be madness not to do this. This is going to be an enormous, add enormous value to the study of Prado collections, and so it'll be a triumph, I'm sure. I can't wait. But you know, I trust them to do the requisite work, and I'm sure they will. So it's an ongoing process as they learn more about the building. I hear from my topos in the Prado, they're learning more about the building as they strip it and what had done in the past. But they're best placed to do it. What did you think of those doors in the portraits? They're cut out, you know, into the. Is that a convincing Velázquez kind of intervention? You're nodding, but you know.
I arranged for a time to publish it in the bulletin. But it was very convincing. I mean, all the previous hypotheses were, you know, they cut away, stuck on the back. None of them were convincing, and this seemed to answer all the questions that the particular characteristics, physical characteristics threw up.
Problem is the date when those doors were put in and when they was cut. The kind of the people, and we all know that one because if you visit the Escorial, the tapestries do that, but they're 18th century. You don't see them actually, the wall, and you don't see it. So as you open the door, Velázquez's signatures would fly out, or non-signatures fly out. I don't know. We'll no doubt we will know in due course. We were looking at with some architectural historians in Belgium, and they were architectural archaeologists, weren't they? And they were looking at the building and what they could tell where windows were and doors were in the past. And there's nobody that could know what they're talking about. They could tell apparently. People who study the Buen Retiro suggest they're early 18th century. Okay.